Slide title: Pathways to Outcomes: How Responsible Fatherhood Program Activities May Lead to Intended Outcomes, July 2020. Logos are shown for the Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood Program, the Parents and Children Together Program, OPRE, and Mathematica.
Today's webinar will introduce and describe 4 Pathways to Outcomes models developed as a part of the Parents and Children Together, or PACT evaluation funded by the Office of Family Assistance. These models hypothesize how program activities may lead to the participant outcomes that responsible fatherhood programs are designed to improve.
Agenda topics appear.
On this slide, you see the agenda for today's webinar. Let's start with some introductions.
Slide title: Introductions. Scott Baumgartner from Mathematica and Kriti Jain from OPRE.
My name is Scott Baumgartner, and I'm a researcher at Mathematica. Mathematica is the research firm that has been conducting the PACT evaluation since 2011. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with us, Mathematica has over 50 years of experience as a research and evaluation partner, working with agencies like the Administration for Children and Families to improve public well-being. I'm excited to be with you today since I've been involved with the PACT evaluation since 2013 and am the lead author of the models that are the subject of this webinar. These models are the product of a large team, and I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge my co-authors, Dan Friend, Pam Holcomb, Liz Clary, Heather Zaveri, and Amy Overcash. As you'll see, we received input from a number of researchers and practitioners on these models and appreciate all of their contributions, especially those of the RF programs that participated in PACT. Father Support Center, which is now known as Fathers and Family Support Center, Connections to Success, Goodwill Easter Seals of Minnesota, and Urban Ventures. Before we dive in, I'd like to introduce Kriti Jain from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, the Federal Project Officer for PACT. Kriti?
Sure, thank you so much. My name is Kriti Jain, and as Scott said, I'm here on behalf of the Administration for Children and Families, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. We know how much all of you have on your plate, and we're so happy that you were able to make the time to come. The PACT team and I are really excited to get to share the results of this challenging but productive process that unfolded over the last couple of years with all of you. We hope that you find it interesting and helpful for you as you think through your programs. Please note that we're recording this webinar and we'll be able to make it available for future viewing or sharing with your colleagues.
Slide title: Background and Motivation.
So let's start at the beginning with some background on the PACT evaluation and the motivation for developing the Pathways to Outcomes models.
Slide title: The Parents and Children Together PACT Evaluation. Discussion points are outlined on screen.
PACT, if you have not heard of it before, is a multi-component study of responsible fatherhood and healthy marriage and relationship education programs that were funded by the Office of Family Assistance within ACF in 2011. For RF programs, PACT included a qualitative study that used ethnographic techniques to learn directly from fathers about their life experiences, an implementation study of the operations of 4 responsible fatherhood programs, and an impact study of those same 4 programs' effectiveness. PACT also included an implementation study and impact study of 2 healthy marriage and relationship education programs. And lastly, PACT has included a few special topic studies. These include a descriptive study of RF programs that primarily served Latinx populations, a study of how RF programs worked with the child support system, and a study on providing trauma-informed care to formerly incarcerated fathers. The Pathways to Outcomes study is also a PACT special topic study.
Slide title: PACT Special Topic Study, Pathways to Outcomes. Discussion points are outlined on screen.
Let me tell you a little bit about what we did in the Pathways to Outcomes study. Basically, we developed 2 sets of models to illustrate how program activities may contribute to intended outcomes for program participants. There's 1 set of models for RF programs and 1 for HMRE programs. There will be a separate webinar on Monday to discuss the HMRE models. I'll talk more about the methods in a minute, but the models contain detailed hypotheses about connections between programs and impacts. The Pathways to Outcomes models are supposed to be focused, not comprehensive. They show the activities and outcomes relevant to a specific hypothesis, whereas other types of models you may be familiar with, like a logic model, usually include a broader set of activities, outcomes, and other factors. To develop the models, we drew on rigorous evaluation findings, literature, and input from practitioners and researchers. This work resulted in a technical report and a brief, and these references are at the end of our presentation today. There are three aims to the models: to help healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood grantees design programs that improve the lives of the people they serve, to help ACF identify promising practice models for delivering HMRF services, and to inform future innovations in HMRF programming.
Slide title: Why develop these models? Discussion points are outlined on screen.
You may be asking why the field needed another set of models. And the answer is that we're at an interesting point in research about responsible fatherhood programs. PACT is the first comprehensive evaluation of OFA-funded RF programs. And by RF programs, I mean specifically those including services to address responsible parenting, healthy relationship skills, and economic security. In broader terms, PACT isn't the first evaluation of programs for low-income fathers. There are others, such as those funded by the Office of Child Support Enforcement, that include some, but not all, of the three core services of RF programs. There is some evidence on the success of programs serving low-income fathers. Some studies have variously shown small, significant effects on parenting, father involvement, and co-parenting, though research has not yet shown effects on economic outcomes, romantic relationships, or well-being. Unlike parenting, which is in many ways controlled by the fathers directly, changes in these areas may involve participation of and cooperation from other people, such as an employer or the mother of the child. So while the research base on programs for fathers is growing, the Pathways to Outcomes studies was designed to be the first step in answering a question that existing research hadn't been designed to address. What specific RF program activities lead to improvements in fathers' outcomes? In other words, if you're an RF grantee, as some of you are, you may be wondering, what does the research say about how I should run my program if I want to make sure the fathers I serve improve their financial standing or become better co-parents or become more involved with their children? These models aren't going to get you all the way there because what they present are hypotheses, educated guesses based on a reading of the evidence that we have. So the other way that these models push the field forward is that they can be used to form specific testable questions for future research. In fact, in the brief that we're planning to release as a part of this study, we will include a set of research questions to go with each model. If you're a researcher on this webinar who's thinking about a local evaluation of an RF grantee, we hope that you could work with the program to pick some strategies from the models, develop research questions around them, and then test a hypothesis.
Slide title: Methods.
On the next few slides, I'd like to go through our methods and data sources.
Slide title: Data sources.
We chose the PACT evaluation as the starting point for these models because, as I mentioned, it is the largest and most detailed study of RF programs that provide parenting, relationship, and economic security services to date. Between 2013 and 2015, PACT enrolled over 5,500 fathers into the 4 participating programs in Missouri, Kansas, and Minnesota that received grants in 2011. I mentioned before that PACT had 3 main pieces: the impact, process, and qualitative studies, which provided us with the opportunity to look at data on program activities and observed impacts for these 4 programs. And you can see the names of the 4 programs on the slide and their locations. The program activities in the models are ones that these programs conducted and which were documented in the PACT process study.
Slide title: Identifying outcomes. Discussion points are outlined on screen.
Our next question in developing these models was to pick the outcomes to focus on. To be evidence-informed, we chose the outcomes for which at least one program in PACT had a statistically significant impact. PACT tested for impacts on 15 different outcomes in the areas of parenting, healthy relationships and co-parenting, economic stability and labor market success, and well-being. It analyzed impacts overall and for each program individually. On the slide, you can see the outcomes that the models focus on and how they were measured in PACT. All of these impacts were measured at 12 months after program enrollment or study enrollment with a survey of fathers who enrolled in the study. So one program had impacts on the co-parenting outcomes of positive conflict behaviors with the focal mother and avoidance of negative conflict behaviors with the mother. Examples of these behaviors include solving problems together or withdrawing from an argument before it spins out of control. Two programs had impacts on socio-emotional and mental well-being outcomes. These include the frequency of experiencing depressive symptoms, their risk for depression, and feelings of external control. This is the father's belief that his life is controlled by external factors and is connected with a sense of helplessness or an inability to solve problems. All of the programs had impacts on the number of consecutive quarters that fathers were employed in the first year after study enrollment and the frequency in age-appropriate activities and nurturing behaviors with their child. Examples of age-appropriate or nurturing behaviors include reading or helping a child with their homework, or feeding and bathing the child. Something you'll note with these models is that there is no model related to healthy romantic relationships. And the reason for that is simply because PACT did not find any impact of the programs on these outcomes. The lack of impacts on healthy romantic relationships is something that's also seen in other research on fatherhood programs.
Slide title, Developing Models. A flowchart of 9 rectangles lined up left to right, showing the process.
With PACT, we had information about how programs were developed and implemented and their impacts, and this slide shows our process for putting those together. The first thing we did was to review all published PACT reports, briefs, and technical appendices. Using them, we developed very thorough models that documented all of the things that each program did. We brought these models to a group of researchers who pushed us to develop hypotheses to link program activities to observed impacts. This recommendation was the seed of the models that we are presenting today. Once we identified the outcomes that I described on the previous slide, we used the initial models to identify activities that might be important for those impacts. For example, if 2 or more programs had impacts on a given outcome, we looked for related activities that both of the programs used. Then, we reviewed the PACT qualitative and implementation study documents again to identify relevant contextual factors to the models, which we call influence factors. For example, these might be things that fathers reported made it harder to spend time with their children, or local and state policies that programs reported made it challenging to address fathers' barriers. Following the development of the models and hypotheses, we conducted a targeted literature review to refine, inform, and support our hypotheses, and particularly the influence factors. Something else I want to highlight in this figure is the iterative process we followed. We didn't just get feedback in one shot from researchers, but made a point to share drafts with practitioners, both on small group calls and in larger forums like last year's HMRF grantee conference. This feedback enhanced the models in important ways. For example, when you see the model on socio-emotional and mental well-being, you'll see an additional outcome for decreased drug use. This was not something that PACT measured, but something we added in at practitioners' urging.
Slide title, Pathways to Outcomes Models.
On the next few slides, I'd like to walk through the models themselves. But to start, let's go over the model template.
Slide title, How to Read the Models. A series of 4 boxes representing hypothesis, key program activities, increased participation, and influence factors. Next to them is a circle representing expected short-term outcomes.
This slide shows what the models look like, and there are 5 components for each model. The hypothesis is a summary statement that links key program activities to the short-term expected outcomes. Key program activities are what grantees do to design, implement, and support the delivery of their services. Some activities, such as encouraging fathers to form bonds with their peers in the programs, could influence multiple outcomes, and as a result, are included in more than one model. Each model includes an arrowhead between key program activities and short-term expected outcomes that says increased participation, to acknowledge that fathers should receive a high amount of content for programs to have a positive effect, something that is supported by other research on RF programs. The red circle shows the expected changes for fathers following program participation. In these models, we only have short-term outcomes, since PACT measured impacts at 12 months after study enrollment. Most other research on programs for fathers also only measures short-term outcomes. Studies we looked at tended to measure impacts either right after the program finished or as long as 2 years after random assignment. And underlying each model are the influence factors. For these models, we separated influence factors into personal characteristics and community and policy context. There is substantial overlap in the influence factors across all of the models. We are presenting these models individually for the sake of clarity, but these outcomes, like program activities and influence factors, overlap, influence, and reinforce each other. For example, the quality of a father's co-parenting relationship influences their father involvement. There's a relationship between well-being and co-parenting, particularly for non-residential fathers. Poor well-being is also highly correlated with unemployment, and labor market outcomes are also related with parenting outcomes. All that is to say that you should be thinking about those relationships as we review these models.
Slide title: Limitations of the models. Discussion points are outlined on screen.
While a lot of work went into these models, we do feel obligated to hold up a big yellow caution sign before getting to the models themselves, because there is a lot more work to be done. First, these models and hypotheses are formative and exploratory. The hypotheses are informed guesses. More research is needed to test the connections between the activities in the models and the expected outcomes. Second, these models only hypothesize causality. PACT tested the impact of the full programs. It wasn't designed to test the influence of specific program activities on specific outcomes. We also need to note that we didn't conduct any additional statistical analyses to develop these models. Third, the activities and influence factors in the models are not exhaustive. They're based on just 4 programs. And our literature search was targeted, not comprehensive. RF programs may use other strategies tailored to their populations and their communities. Last, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have not documented long-term outcomes to present. For example, one idea motivating RF programs is that greater father involvement can lead to improved outcomes for children in the long run. But the impact of RF programs on child outcomes has not been measured. So for program operators listening in today, we hope that these models are helpful for thinking through your program activities, but they're not recommendations. Before adopting any of the activities in the models, please think about whether they're appropriate for your program or the populations that you serve.
Slide title: Model 1: Healthy relationships between co-parents. The slide shows the same design of 4 boxes, next to which is the circle, as outlined in the previous slide. The speaker reads the detailed text on screen.
So let's go to the models. Model 1, which you see on the screen, focuses on helping fathers maintain a positive and respectful relationship with their co-parents. An alliance between co-parents is essential to fathers being involved with their children and developing satisfying relationships with them. For parents to support one another, fathers must build relationship skills as well as parenting knowledge and skills in order to help make child-rearing decisions and to share parenting responsibility. The co-parenting outcomes measured in PACT were increased use of positive conflict behaviors and reduced use of negative conflict behaviors.
The slide title remains the same with the hypothesis section displayed.
And the hypothesis is as follows, and we've tried to zoom in because there's a lot of text on the screen and know that it's hard to read. The hypothesis is that programs may improve fathers' co-parenting relationships by integrating personal development, parenting, and healthy relationships content in a group-based workshop. educating fathers about domestic violence, providing individual case management, and engaging co-parents. Programs primarily address co-parenting through workshop content on personal development, parenting, and healthy relationships. When sequencing content, programs often offer personal development content such as emotional well-being, goal setting, and personal accountability before co-parenting content. Fathers also may have opportunities to discuss co-parenting issues and challenges one-on-one with a qualified case manager or other staff member. Programs can partner with community providers to educate fathers on domestic violence. Supplementary services that help fathers reduce barriers to child access and engage co-parents may further strengthen fathers' co-parenting relationships.
The slide title remains the same with the Key Program Activities section displayed.
The model has 3 key program activities. The first few points are about the program workshop. Generally, Responsible Fatherhood programs provide content in a single integrated core workshop or in separate topic-specific workshops. Providing parenting and relationship skills content in an integrated workshop may increase fathers' exposure to both types of content, and both are essential for healthy co-parenting relationships. In PACT, fathers in programs that provided separate relationship skills workshops received very little of that content. Personal development topics may set a foundation for the parenting and relationship content in the integrated workshop. Personal development content includes things like personal accountability, setting goals, identifying individual values, and exploring what it means to be a father and a provider. Other topics that we identified as potentially important are on the slide, including the importance of fathers in raising children. Programs may want to maintain a workshop environment that is comfortable for fathers to be candid about their troubles and insecurities as parents and co-parents. A participant-only workshop environment can provide a space for fathers to discuss issues of privilege and discrimination safely and without judgment. In addition to the workshop, the model suggests that case management may be important to address barriers that impede effective co-parenting, such as economic instability, child support enforcement issues, domestic violence, and depression or other mental health challenges. Last, programs may want to educate fathers on physical, emotional, and psychological abuse and domestic violence, and involve community partners in this education. Many fathers in the RF programs in PACT reported being perpetrators and victims of violence in their prior romantic relationships. In this model, we have a number of individual and interpersonal characteristics as influence factors, because in a co-parenting relationship, contextual factors for both the father and the mother matter. These include their relationship history, trauma history, family structure and dynamics, multiple partner fertility, and residential status. As far as community characteristics, high rates of crime, poverty, and unemployment may affect the relationship between co-parents. Dealing with an unsafe environment or constrained resources may cause tension. Family law, such as how child custody is determined, the process for getting parenting time agreements, and the child support order modification process were significant challenges for the fathers in PACT.
Slide title, Model 2, Father Development and Well-Being.
Model 2 focuses on activities aimed at improving and promoting the personal growth and well-being of fathers. Research suggests that low-income fathers are particularly at risk for a variety of mental and physical health conditions that may influence their ability to achieve their goals of being supportive parents, partners, and providers. The outcomes targeted by this model were measured in PACT by fathers reported decrease in depressive symptoms, moderate or high depression, and feelings of external control. Based on expert and practitioner input, we added decreased drug use as an outcome because it was a significant challenge for fathers in PACT and is something that is closely related to other measures of health and well-being.
The slide title remains the same with the hypothesis section displayed.
The hypothesis is as follows. Programs may support father development and well-being by reducing their risk for depression or depressive symptoms and associated risk of substance disorder. To achieve this, programs can encourage peer interactions, hire staff with whom participants can identify, and partner with mental health and substance use disorder treatment programs to increase access to these services. Programs may need to include substantial personal development content in core workshops.
The slide title remains the same with the Key Program Activities section displayed.
We identified 4 categories of key program activities for this model. The first program activity here is hiring and training relatable and qualified staff. All of the PACT programs hired program graduates, but representing similar communities as fathers wasn't all. Many also were qualified through relevant education and training. Research on RF programs suggests that encouraging bonds between these staff and participants may unlock fathers' intrinsic motivation to improve themselves and might also improve program participation. In addition to bonds between program staff and participants, it may also be important for programs to encourage bonds between the program participants themselves. Many fathers in PACT reported having few people outside of family in their social networks. Social networks can protect against isolation and depression and can be motivating for men to engage with their children. Personal development content may also be important for father development and well-being. As in the first model, we suggest that it may be important to integrate it into the core workshop. Personal development content both builds skills for fathers to address challenges and encourages personal accountability. In particular, one of the impacts that PACT measured was fathers' sense of external control. Learning personal development content may help fathers feel like they have more control and agency in their lives. The last activity I'll mention is the potential importance of supplementary services. RF programs are often unable to address fathers' issues related to mental health and drug use alone. Another supplementary service that may be important is a peer support group to discuss masculinity and manhood, building on the personal development content in the workshop. The individual influence factors in this model are ones that are targeted by key program activities, including the father's peers, social networks and supports, access to and involvement with their children, and residential status and family structure. When addressing these sorts of outcomes, programs may also consider how communities influence individuals' development and well-being. For example, living in communities with few resources can create stress and lead to poorer mental and physical well-being. Programs may also want to be mindful of the impact that racism has on mental health, both interpersonal and structural. For these programs, it was a significant factor. Most of the fathers in PACT were African American, and racism intersects with many of the other factors listed here, including poverty, policing, and trauma.
Slide title, Model 3, Consistent Employment.
Model 3 focuses on activities aimed at improving fathers' economic stability. Improving their employment situation was an important motivator for fathers' enrollment in PACT, but many fathers faced significant barriers to labor market success. In PACT, labor market success was measured by the number of consecutive quarters employed during the year after study enrollment. PACT also looked at fathers' earnings, but that outcome is not included in this model because we did not find any effects of the programs on fathers' actual or reported income.
The slide title remains the same with the hypothesis section displayed.
Our hypothesis is as follows. Programs may improve fathers' employment and economic stability by providing intensive and comprehensive work-related services. Programs may implement core employment services in a way that requires daily attendance and with sufficient dosage of content focusing on skills needed to acquire and retain a job, as well as case management and job development services.
The slide title remains the same with the key program activities displayed.
The model includes 4 key program activities. The programs in PACT had case management in their program models that helped fathers set individual goals and develop plans to help fathers articulate why they wanted a job and what they had to do to get one. The other thing that case management did was to help address fathers' barriers to employment, including substance misuse and housing issues, before they started looking for a job. The PACT programs that showed consistent employment outcomes waited to place fathers into jobs until they were deemed work-ready and had addressed major employment barriers. Another feature of PACT programs with impact was job development. Job developers in these programs worked with employers to find positions suitable for the program participants. This appeared to be particularly valuable for men with incarceration histories, who made up a substantial proportion of PACT fathers and who faced particularly limited job prospects. A lot of RF programs provide an employment workshop, but a main feature of some PACT programs stood out to us related to this model, and that was the intensity and frequency of the employment workshop. To put a finer point on it, these workshops required daily attendance and were in excess of 40 hours long, mirroring what it was like to go to work every day. Practitioners felt that the structure of a daily group session taught workplace ethics and accountability. In addition to the structure, the employment workshop may focus on pre-employment skills, by which I mean teaching fathers about professionalism, workplace communication, accountability, responding to criticism from a supervisor, and other related topics that are sometimes referred to as soft skills. And again, supplementary services and community partnerships may also be important for RF programs achieving impacts related to labor market success. This model highlights two types: opportunities for education, training, and work experience, and supports to reduce employment barriers. Research has shown that pre-employment training paired with transitional jobs increased short-term employment for populations similar to those served by RF programs. Two PACT programs provided on-the-job experiences for participants through community placement into internships and subsidized jobs. For influence factors, this model highlights participant characteristics that are often barriers to employment, in which case management may seek to address. In the community, a big factor influencing the ability of fathers to get and keep jobs is simply the availability of jobs in the community and the ability of fathers to get them. I should note here, too, that we include the availability of community-based organizations, since strong community partnerships is a key program activity.
Slide title: Model 4, Parenting Skills and Father Involvement.
Model 4, and our final model, focuses on activities aimed at increasing parenting skills, confidence in parenting abilities, and father involvement. Improving access to and the relationships with their children were high priorities for fathers in PACT, and research finds linkages between parenting and father involvement and child well-being. Improved parenting skills and increased involvement may benefit fathers as well. Fatherhood motivated the participants in PACT to transform their own lives and be a positive influence for their children. This model targets two related impacts observed in PACT: improved parenting skills, measured by the increased use of nurturing behaviors with a child, and increased father involvement, measured by increased participation in age-appropriate activities with a child.
The slide title remains the same with the hypothesis section displayed.
The hypothesis is as follows. Programs may improve fathers' parenting skills and increase involvement in their children's lives by front-loading parenting content in a group-based workshop that covers the importance of father involvement, child development, and co-parenting. Providing parenting services early in the program may engage fathers and increase the likelihood that they receive parenting content. Programs may also need to help fathers reduce barriers to child access to increase effects on father involvement.
The slide title remains the same with the key program activities displayed.
We identified 3 common features to the PACT programs that may have contributed to impacts in parenting skills and father involvement. Content-wise, the workshops the PACT programs ran used different curricula, but they all had 3 topics in common. The first is what it means to be a father. The second is about children's development and needs. And the third is about co-parenting. All of the programs also taught concrete parenting skills, such as communicating and playing with children. Other more challenging parenting skills, such as providing consistent positive praise and modeling self-regulation, are also critically important topics to cover. Combined, these topics help fathers understand that they have something to contribute to raising their child beyond regularly paying child support, and give them the skills to be involved in parenting. A key goal of the parenting workshops was to help fathers understand their importance as a parent. A mixture of confidence and skills is important to improving a father's parenting abilities. Fathers in RF programs may need adapted parenting content that is responsive to their backgrounds. Parenting programs may teach parenting approaches that are different from fathers' own experiences. Reflecting on how they were raised could bring up past trauma that programs need to address. For the fathers in PACT, this sometimes manifested as the absence of their own fathers in their lives and how that influenced their desire to not have their children experience those same experiences. At the same time, parenting workshops should uphold parents' cultural backgrounds as a source of empowerment. Parenting workshops may include space for conversations about how discrimination and racism shape parent-child interactions, such as how fathers cope with being discriminated against and how they teach their children to navigate a society where people of different races are treated unjustly, and how to parent in the context of racism and discrimination. As with the employment workshops, the model suggests that dosage is important. Research has shown that longer programs tend to have stronger positive effects. In PACT, fathers could receive between 12 and 25 hours of parenting content, and fathers averaged receiving about 9 hours. We hypothesized that 12 hours of content is the minimum dosage to see impacts on parenting outcomes, with the assumption that some fathers will access less than the full amount of content offered. The sequencing of parenting content may also be important. Since the largest proportion of fathers in PACT reported that they enrolled in a program to improve their relationships with their children, we suggest that programs might capitalize on that motivation by offering parenting content early. As with other hypotheses, we also think it may be important for programs to encourage peer connections and offer case management. For peer connections, this model highlights 3 strategies: cohorts, or enrolling a group of fathers at once and having them follow the same path through the program; supplementary peer discussion groups; and events like parent-child outings. These may help fathers build bonds with each other, help hold one another accountable to reaching their parenting goals, and build their personal beliefs about being positive influences on the lives of their children. One-on-one case management may help fathers address barriers to access to their children, such as housing stability, substance use disorder, employment, and child support issues, as well as helping them address issues with individual co-parenting relationships. For parenting outcomes, researchers have written about 4 types of individual characteristics that influence parenting outcomes. They are father factors, such as age, mental health, residential status, and employment status; mother factors, including the relationship status with the mother; child factors, including the child's developmental stage and biological sex; and co-parenting. The PACT study identified some others, including the parenting examples fathers experienced as children. These shaped their fatherhood beliefs and values that they entered the program with. Many of the community factors listed here are similar to the other models. For an example, housing laws that prevent convicted felons from living in public housing may result in some fathers being unable to live with their children, and this will have effects on parenting outcomes.
Slide title: Discussion and Questions.
So those are the 4 models, and I thank you for listening and thinking deeply about them with us. With the time we have left, we'd love to take some questions, and you can submit those through the Q&A function in your browser window.
Slide title: References for Pathways to Outcomes publications.
And while the questions are coming in, I also did want to share with you some information about where you can find the report about these models in the brief I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. So the report contains much more information than I've been able to present today about the literature on programs for fathers and just a much deeper discussion of the models. The brief, which is not yet out, but is coming soon, will present the models along with specific research questions tied to the key program activities in the models. Answering these questions may help determine how to best implement the program activities and whether they can be considered effective or evidence-based. So let's answer some questions.
All right, Scott, we've got 2 questions that have come in so far. The first one is from Nicholas at Children's Bureau, and he asked, which programs worked with co-parents who were still in romantic relationships with the mother of their children? I'm wondering if that had an impact and why there were no outcomes related to relationship quality.
That's a good question. So I know that there was one program in PACT that provided some counseling services to fathers and their romantic partners, though that wasn't provided using OFA funds. And a couple of the programs allowed fathers to bring their romantic partners to the relationship workshop. I can't remember offhand how many programs did that, but that was, I think, fairly common.
Yeah, I can tag on to that, Scott. This is Dan Friend from Mathematica in Chicago. The programs in PACT all served a range of fathers, and they definitely had, as we found in the qualitative study of PACT programs, they had a range of romantic relationships. Some fathers were not in romantic relationships, others were in on again, off again, some were with the mothers of their children, others had formed new relationships and had broader social families. So it was really across the board. I don't think that there was a specific analysis done looking at a father's relationship status and those outcomes, but I'd have to go back and review the impact reports and probably the technical appendices to know for sure. We had another question from Jack Johnson in Northeast Florida, Healthy Start. And he asked, could a program incorporate 2 models?
I think at the beginning of the webinar, it said a lot of these models and the key program activities across the models, there's definitely a lot of overlap and interaction between those. So I think that, yes, programs should be encouraged to think about the key program activities in these models and what might work for them in terms of the population that they serve and the context they operate in.
And those were our only questions so far. Did others have questions they wanted to submit?
If there are no other questions, I will make one final plug for the technical report for the Pathways to Outcome models that's now available on ACF's website. And you can see the citation there, and when the slides go out and the recording is made public, I think that PACT there is a hyperlink that'll take you directly to that report. And if you are thinking about this some more after the webinar, then our contact information is on this slide, and you can always feel free to reach out with any of your questions.
Slide title. For more information, email addresses appear. Kritijan, kriti.jain@acf.hhs.gov. Kathleen McCoy, KATHLEEN.MCCOY@acf.hhs.gov. Heather Zaveri, HZAVERI@MATHEMATICA-MPR.com. Scott Baumgartner, SBAUMGARTNER@MATHEMATICA-MPR.com.
Oh, Scott, we just got two more questions here. Another from Jack Johnson in Northeast Florida, asking what cooperation have you received from OCSC regarding information sharing on the dads?
I don't know the direct answer to that question. I do know that there was a special topic study that was put out about how the programs interacted with child support in their jurisdictions, and the implementation study also has some information about that. We included in a couple of the models information about family law issues. So in some places, the way that child support agencies were set up made it much easier for the programs to establish relationships and do things like get reductions in arrears for program participation, or make it easier for programs to advocate for fathers in modifying orders and things like that. So I would refer to that special topics report.
Yes, and this is Heather Zaveri. Hi, y'all. I would just add in another plug for that forthcoming special topics report. It is a look at, it combines the impact data to do special analyses to look at how fathers' financial support, what it looked like for children, and it also pulls in data from our qualitative study to kind of see what we learned from the qualitative study related to financial support for fathers lined up with the quantitative findings. That is in the final stages of clearance and should be available in the next within the next month or two.
We also have a question from Sherry Tillis from Fathers and Family Support Center. She asks, what are the next steps in this study? How can these models be replicated?
So in terms of PACT, PACT is finally coming to an end. and with the end of PACT, I think comes the end of this particular study. We do have the brief coming out soon. But what we want to do is encourage new grantees and local evaluators for those grantees to read the reports and look at the models and think about what key activities might work well for their programs and come up with questions that they might be able to answer through their local evaluations. So I don't think that there are any concrete next steps, but I think that there are a lot of opportunities coming out of these to really move the field forward and learn more about what aspects of responsible fatherhood programs contribute to positive outcomes for fathers. I think, so those are all the questions we have today, and we thank you all for attending today's webinar. And like I said, our contact information is on the slide. So if you have any other questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.